So let's walk through some disorders that affect the red blood cells, the erythrocytes. So most disorders affecting red blood cells are classified as either anemia or polycythemia. The term anemia means that you have a very low oxygen carrying capacity. So when we say someone is anemic, it truly means they're not carrying enough oxygen. Polycythemia, poly means many. And so polycythemia essentially means that someone has too many red blood cells and it's causing the blood to be sludgy. It's causing a high blood viscosity. So that's kind of how we classify the two main types of red blood cell disorders. It's either anemia, you're not carrying enough oxygen, or polycythemia, you have way too many red blood cells and your blood is thick. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about anemia because we're going to talk about all the different kinds of anemia because there are a lot of different kinds. So again, with anemia, it's a low oxygen carrying capacity. And anemia is actually a sign of a disease. It's not the disease itself. So what that means is a lot of times a disease will have with it anemia. And so that's just sort of a symptom or a sign of that particular disease. And if someone is incredibly anemic, it just means that the oxygen levels in their body cannot support normal metabolism. So the typical symptoms of anemia are you're really tired, so fatigue. You might be pale, so pallor, shortness of breath because you're not carrying enough oxygen, and cold. You might be cold all the time. So those are all really common with anemia. And like I mentioned, we have a lot of reasons why someone can be anemic. So I have the 3 reasons listed here in red. So we're going to go through each one and talk about each one in a little more detail. So the first one that might cause anemia is blood loss. That should make sense. You are not carrying enough oxygen because you are losing blood. You are losing blood, red blood cells. You don't have enough to support oxygen carrying. And so blood loss kind of comes in 2 forms. One is called hemorrhagic anemia. You are bleeding out. This is rapid blood loss. It is a traumatic accident. You are losing too much blood volume. You are losing red blood cells. You're not carrying oxygen where it needs to go. The other is something called chronic hemorrhagic anemia. And the term chronic means long lasting. So this would be a very slow blood loss, like a bleeding stomach ulcer or bleeding hemorrhoids, and you're constantly bleeding, and it's causing you not to be able to carry enough oxygen because you're losing too many red blood cells. Another thing that can cause anemia, low oxygen carrying capacity, is low red blood cell production. So you are not making enough red blood cells. This could be caused because you don't have enough iron. So I'm actually going to skip back to the image of our hemoglobin molecule. So here's the image of our hemoglobin molecule. And if you remember, it has 4 globin chains, and then it has 4 heme, which is the red pigment, heme rings. And then right in the middle of that heme ring, you can see that green iron molecule. And that is what the oxygen binds to. If you do not have enough iron, then your hemoglobin basically cannot function. If you don't have enough iron, then you cannot bind oxygen onto hemoglobin. So that's called iron deficiency anemia. Another type of low blood cell, red blood cell production would be something called pernicious anemia. In order for you to produce red blood cells, you have to have B12. You have to have vitamin B12. So you have to have enough B12 in your diet. Now, pernicious anemia is something that is very common in people who have had gastric bypass surgery. And the reason is because in order for you to absorb B12 out of the food that you eat, your body requires something called intrinsic factor. This is actually made and produced in the lining of the stomach. So when people have gastric bypass surgery, which essentially bypasses the majority of your stomach, then you're unable to absorb B12 from your food. And it can lead to pernicious anemia. You're not able to make enough red blood cells. So it's not uncommon for people with gastric bypass to have B12 injections for the rest of their lives so that they can make enough red blood cells. Another type of low red blood cell production that causes anemia is called renal anemia. This one, obviously, that term renal, remember, means kidney. And so this is a lack of erythropoietin. Remember, that's the hormone that's being released from the kidneys that causes you to produce red blood cells in your bone marrow. So if you have a problem with the kidneys, if you aren't releasing enough EPO, then you're not making enough red blood cells. And then the last one is called aplastic anemia. This is destruction of red bone marrow. And this can happen from medication, chemotherapy drugs, can happen from viruses. So that is aplastic anemia. If your red bone marrow has been destroyed, then you can't make, not only can you not make red blood cells, but you also can't make white blood cells or platelets. And then the third cause of anemia is from the destruction of red blood cells. So it's not that you don't have enough, it's that you're producing them, they're just being destroyed. These are typically genetic diseases, and they result in red blood cells that are incredibly fragile, and that red blood cell will rupture and no longer function to carry oxygen. So there's two kinds of genetic diseases that I'll mention. Thalassemia, this is sometimes we call it sea blood. So it's very common in people of Mediterranean ancestry. And sickle cell anemia. Again, these are both genetic disorders, and they are genetic. They result in red blood cells that look a little different and are unable to truly carry that oxygen. So here's an image of sickle cell anemia. So you can see a normal red blood cell on the top, and then you can see a sickled red blood cell down here on the bottom, and they look very different. This has to do with a protein change. It's actually, they're missing one amino acid in the globin chain, and it causes the red blood cell to look like that. So the three things that can lead to anemia are blood loss. You are losing a lot of blood, and because of that, you're not able to carry enough oxygen. You are not producing enough red blood cells. And if you're not producing enough red blood cells, you're not carrying oxygen. And high red blood cell destruction, typically due to a genetic condition like thalassemia or sickle cell anemia. Now, I do want to mention a little more about sickle cell anemia. This is very common in African Americans. And like I mentioned, it is a genetic disease. One copy of the sickle cell trait, so you get two genes, one from mom, one from dad. One copy is actually beneficial because it can protect you from malaria. Malaria is a disease that actually infects the red blood cell. So one copy of the sickle cell gene actually prevents individuals from contracting malaria. Two copies of the sickle cell gene, however, result in sickle cell anemia. Sickle cell anemia is a horrific genetic disease in that when your oxygen levels are low, that is typically what is going to trigger the red blood cell to sickle and change shape. So people with sickle cell, a lot of times they can't exercise, they can't get exerted because it actually exacerbates their condition. Now, remember, I told you that we have two different classifications of erythrocyte disorders. We have anemia, which we just walked through. And then we also have something called polycythemia. Polycythemia is a lot of red blood cells, and it causes blood viscosity to go way up. And so there's two types of polycythemia. There's polycythemia vera and secondary polycythemia. So I have the pictures down here at the bottom to show you when someone has a lot of red blood cells, that means that they're carrying a lot of oxygen, but you're going to see like their hands are going to be really, really red because of all of the hemoglobin. And you can see the image over here on the right. This is a blood smear, and you can see how concentrated those red blood cells are. So you can definitely tell that this would make the blood very sludgy and thick. So again, one type of polycythemia is called polycythemia vera. And this is cancer, bone marrow cancer. Now the term cancer just means uncontrolled cell division. So this is what is going to lead to tumors and masses. It's that the cells are constantly dividing. Bone marrow cancer means that the cells in your red bone marrow are constantly going through division. And this is going to cause you to produce excess red blood cells. But it's also going to cause blood viscosity to go way up. Typically the hematocrit, normal hematocrit, remember, is around 45%. Hematocrit in someone who has polycythemia vera can jump to 80%. Blood volume can sometimes become doubled, and it will impair circulation. So heart attacks and strokes are very common. So the treatment for polycythemia vera typically is to remove the blood and replace it with saline. So essentially, it's just going to be to dilute the blood as much as possible and make it less thick. Now, the other kind of polycythemia is something called secondary polycythemia. This can happen naturally when you go to a high altitude. So I know I mentioned this in the last video, that when you travel to a high altitude, the air is thinner up there, right? There's less available oxygen. That's going to cause your kidneys to release erythropoietin, and it's going to cause you to produce more red blood cells. So your red blood cell count will come up. Secondary polycythemia is very common, and it's a natural mechanism that your body will go through to make up for less oxygen in the atmosphere. However, I know I also mentioned in the last lecture something called blood doping. So again, blood doping is when people will draw off their blood, spin it down, get packed red blood cells, and essentially give themselves packed red blood cells. And so what they're doing is they're just trying to boost their hematocrit levels. Now, anytime you draw off your blood, that's going to trigger erythropoietin to be released from the kidneys. Erythropoietin is going to get released, and it's going to replace the lost red blood cells. But again, if you're going to inject yourself back with the blood that you just drew off, then it's going to cause your hematocrit to go up. And this will increase your oxygen carrying capacity. But again, it makes your blood thick and sludgy. So the risks of this are stroke and heart failure due to high blood viscosity. So this is another disease that I want to mention. It's not one of the ones that I've already talked about. It's not anemia. It's not polycythemia. This is called erythropoietic protoporphyria, or sometimes for short, we call it EPP. This is a genetic disease, and it prevents the production of heme. So remember, heme is that red pigment. But without heme, you can't carry any oxygen. So the symptoms of this protoporphyria are you're really tired. So you might sleep all day. Your skin will be very pale in color. So I want you to think about like the rosy undertone that you see in your skin has a lot to do with the heme, that red heme from hemoglobin. The red lips, your nail beds, any flush to your face, that's coming, that red color is from heme in hemoglobin. So if you don't have heme, you're going to be really pale, and you are going to crave iron. So red meat, you're going to crave that. And typically people with this condition have extreme sensitivity to light. When they're exposed to light, you can see the image here, they'll break out in blisters on their skin. So I want you to think of all those things. People that sleep all day long, and they can't be in the sunlight, and they're really pale, and they like to eat bloody red meat. It is thought that the legend of vampires was actually just people that were suffering from this erythropoietic protoporphyria.